Welcome to the 5th season of No More Silos, the podcast where we dismantle cultural boundaries and dive deep into the intersection of language, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Dr. Erica Santiago, and I'm so excited to bring you another season of meaningful conversations designed to help you deconstruct and reconstruct your faith in ways that are more inclusive, more honest, and more reflective of Jesus' love for all people. Before we dive in, I want to give a special shout out to our incredible Patreon subscribers. Your support helps make this podcast possible, and we are so grateful for your partnership. If you haven't yet, be sure to check out our new Substack for even more exclusive content. The link is in the show notes, along with all the details on how you can join us in making a difference. Now, let's get into today's episode. Grab your coffee, and let's break down some silos together. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of No More Silos. My name is Erica and this is my podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome back, y'all. And so today we're going to touch upon a little bit about the history of mentoring, a little bit on the history of disciple making, all things I've talked about. Disciple making definitely here on the podcast. In fact, I had to take an entire course in seminary on small groups, and one of the things that we had to do in that course was study the history of small groups. It goes all the way back to really the beginning of time. People have sat around in a group, in a circle, with someone talking. It's the Socratic method, Jesus's method, and having that Q&A and having the opportunity to discuss what you're learning with the teacher, with the facilitator. But when we think of disciple making, we usually think of teaching. And so Jesus was known as a rabbi. And in the first century, there were a whole bunch. I was just explaining this to one of my kids last night. There was a whole bunch of rabbis floating around Palestine, folks who had other folks following them, hanging on their every word, listening to what they say. But Jesus, as a rabbi, as a teacher, with his followers, Jesus was able to do so much more. And then Jesus did what all the others couldn't. He came back from the dead. So there's that. So he wins. But today I want to talk about empowering your team to mentor and to lead as disciple makers. Because I'm thinking, if you go back through all the stuff we've talked about over the years here on No More Silos, I'm thinking that mentoring and disciple making are two concepts that often get used interchangeably. And some might even think that they're conflated, but I would say interchangeably is probably a better word because they come from distinct traditions with unique histories, but they kind of land us in the same place in our modern context. And so when we're talking, one of the barriers to folks sometimes coming to church or participating and engaging is the language that we use. And in our last season on No More Silos, I did several episodes about the language we use to communicate our theology, communicate our ideas, and where these ideas come from. And the book that inspired that conversation was a book called The Mother Tongue, talking about the 900-year history of the English language in particular, because I speak English, and that's what the words that I use are English. So there's that. So mentoring and disciple making, we use those words interchangeably. So what I want to do today is unpack these two ideas and talk about how we can use the language of mentorship to connect with new believers and even non-believers as we live out the Great Commission. And then talk about how, right now as I'm recording this, it's January. It might be February before you hear this, though. It's a season of fresh starts. It's a time to reflect, to build, to nurture relationships that will shape the year ahead. And so whether you're preparing your ministry team or small group leaders or volunteers, fostering a culture of mentoring and discipleship is going to be vital for personal growth for you and community transformation for them, for everybody else. So let's talk a little bit of history. Here on No More Silos, I love to talk about history. I'm a history nerd. It's one of my favorite topics. I watch all the history documentaries. Actually, history documentaries is what kind of was my springboard into going to seminary. I mean, long story short, it was my weekly watching of history documentaries and increasing interest in Christian history in particular that really kind of nudged me towards going to school for it to learn a little bit more. So, but here's the history of mentoring. Let's talk about mentoring first. The concept of mentoring dates back to ancient times. The word itself comes from Greek mythology. In Homer's Odyssey, you probably read that in high school like I did. Mentor, as a proper name, capital M, mentor, was a trusted guide and advisor to Odysseus' son, Telemachus. The idea of mentorship is guidance, teaching, and life-on-life leadership continued through the centuries in various forms. For example, in the Middle Ages, apprenticeships became common, where a master craftsman would train a younger person in their trade. I've even heard John Mark Comer, in his book Practicing the Way, refer to following Jesus as apprenticing Jesus. And so in more recent history, mentoring became a staple in professional and academic settings. The mentor is someone who imparts wisdom, helps navigate challenges, and provides a model for personal or professional growth. It's relational and goal-oriented, but it's typically limited to specific areas of life, like career or education. A great book for kind of helping put all of that together is Darius Daniels' book, Relational Intelligence. Great book, helps you navigate the 4 areas of relationships or 4 types of relationships that you might have, mentoring being one of them. But because we, in the Christian context, use the ancient word disciple, which nobody else uses except for Christians. I'm just going to say that right there. Nobody else uses that. So a lot of times in our church, we'll say, teaching. Disciple making, on the other hand, has a distinctively spiritual and biblical origin. Jesus didn't just mentor his followers, he called them to be his disciples. And the term disciple comes from the Greek word mathetes. I don't know. Not good with pronunciations here, but I'll spell it for you in case you're taking notes. Mathetes. Mathetes. Meaning learner or student. Jesus' model of discipleship was holistic. He didn't just teach lessons or offer advice. He invited his disciples into a way of life, practicing the way, walking with them daily, sharing meals, engaging in ministry together, and teaching them to obey everything he commanded. The Great Commission, right? And in fact, the Great Commission, or what we call the Great Commission today, is found in Matthew's gospel account of Jesus' life and ministry and resurrection. In Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20, it says, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." That's what Jesus says to his disciples after the resurrection. He's hanging out with them in his resurrected new body before he ascends back to heaven, which happens in Acts chapter 1. He is telling them, do this, go tell everybody, teach everybody else. And not just the Jewish people, but go and teach all the nations. And when in the way that people will know they're followers of me is because they're going to make a public declaration. That's baptism. And they're going to do that in the name of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Side note, there are different groups of so-called Christians that don't believe in the Trinity. So their Bible will not say in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They've edited that part out. But Jesus has commanded us to love God, to love one another, and to love our neighbor. And those are the commands. And so how we do those things together demonstrates what we actually believe about Jesus. So disciple making is an all-encompassing process of spiritual transformation where the ultimate goal is to be like Jesus. Not just competency in a skill or competency in knowledge in a subject. Not just competency in the skill or knowledge of being a Christian. Y'all know these folks, the folks that are really good at going to church and doing church, but they kind of suck at life. They suck at being an actual Christian, but they're really good at church. They can sing a song, they can preach a sermon, they can share a word, They can even say something encouraging, but their life doesn't line up with it. And that's why I'm here, to kind of help us navigate sometimes how to do that a little bit better. So where do mentoring and discipleship making or disciple making converge? How do these two concepts get conflated? Where does the overlap exist? Well, the overlap lies in their relational and developmental aspects. By mentoring, both mentoring and disciple making involve these three things. Mentoring and disciple making both involve investing in others, modeling behavior, and guiding people toward goals. Investing in others, modeling behavior, guiding people toward goals. Whether you're mentoring someone in their career or discipling them in their faith, you're committing to helping that person grow. A mentor sets an example in their field, whereas a disciple maker reflects the character and teachings of Jesus. So as you're modeling your behavior, you're modeling your life, how you respond to bad news, how you respond to good news, how you respond to the politics, which way the wind blows, how you respond to weather, all of those things. You're modeling behavior. And by allowing that person that you're mentoring or discipling to have proximity to you in a way where they can see that, you're investing in helping them grow. And all of that culminates in helping your mentee achieve personal or professional milestones, while disciple makers guide others, guide their person toward spiritual maturity and obedience in Christ. Obedience in Christ sounds like it's straightforward and easy, but it actually isn't. It's not. Because our human nature sometimes takes over and says, I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. So guiding people towards goals, disciple makers guide others towards spiritual maturity and obedience in Christ. But here's the key difference. Mentoring is typically transactional. I'll say that again, transactional, while disciple making is transformational. Mentoring often has an end point when the mentee achieves a specific goal, but disciple making is ongoing, rooted in the mission of multiplying followers of Jesus who make more disciples. It's a multiplication. It sounds like a pyramid scheme, but it's multiplication, because as I invest in you, you invest in someone else. Now, ideally, mentoring should kind of work that way too, right? If you're doing it well. You're not hoarding information, but the difference is it's transactional. I can mentor you and may not have any other reason to engage with you at all in your life. I'm only concerned about that one sliver, that one silo, that one small area that I am helping you navigate. So if I'm mentoring you on how to be a better electronic discovery project manager, that's all we're talking about. I don't care about your dog or your kids. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that because I'm personable and nice. But really, that's not what you're there for, especially if I've set aside an hour of my time and that's what we're going to talk about that day. But if I am discipling you, well, it doesn't mean that you take over my schedule, but it also makes how I engage with you different. It's a transformative way. Maybe I respond to your text message quicker. I take your phone call, even if I'm busy in the middle of something. Or I text you back and say, hey, I can't talk now. Let's set up another time. Can we talk a little bit later? Like I care. Does that sound more fitting to what I'm saying here? So mentoring is transactional. Discipleship is transformational. It should make a huge transformative change to your life. Now, here's where it gets exciting, though. In today's culture, the word discipleship can feel intimidating or unfamiliar to those who are outside of the church. Increasingly, and I've said this plenty of times on the podcast, there are more people who not only didn't grow up in church, their parents didn't grow up in church. Their grandparents didn't grow up in church. I always find it fascinating when people talk about wanting to go back to the old days when everybody went to church and stuff. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, but you got folks that are adults right now whose grandparents didn't even go to church. So where are we going? What are we trying to go back to? What lifestyle? And even when you had a lot of people who went to church, there were still a lot of people in the juke joint on Sunday morning. So, thank you, Color Purple, for painting that picture for me. So discipleship as a word, as an idea, may be intimidating. It may be unfamiliar to someone who's not familiar with Christianese. But most people understand and value the idea of mentorship. So how can we adapt the language of mentorship to engage others in the process of disciple making? Well, we can frame discipleship as a relationship of growth. Instead of saying, do you want to be discipled? Do you want to build a snowman? You could ask, would you like someone to walk alongside you in your faith journey? This shifts the focus to a relational connection. Highlight shared learning. People often view mentors as having all the answers. A lot of times I definitely don't have all the answers because I have mentors. So I'm always looking for answers. But discipleship is about mutual growth. You might say, let's grow together as we follow Jesus. And I think that opens the door much more for someone who's a new believer. For example, in our church, and I think I've shared this before too, but if you're new, this might be new to you. I don't sit in the front. I'm the pastor's wife. I don't sit in the front. I hang out in the back. Why? Because when people show up late to church, you don't know what obstacles they had to work through, even if they're their own worst enemy, like they kept hitting the snooze button, to get to church. I want to be back there in the back so that when that person that shows up 15, 20 minutes late after service starts, I can give them a hug. I can smile. I can say, hey, you are welcome in our church. Now, granted, the greeters can do that too. And they do. Of course they do. However, having leaders in the back of the church can really help to say, let's grow together. We're all in this together. I'm not special because I'm sitting in the front row. I want to be in the back or be around everybody else. I think that helps us with new believers and non-believers because you're really kind of bringing yourself saying, hey, here I am. I want to get to know you, but at the same time, I want you to get to know me too. Being fully seen, fully known by someone else. So it's shared learning. I learn as much from the folks who are sitting in my Bible study classes as I learn from the books that I read, the videos I watch, the classes I've sat in myself. It's a mutual thing. So frame discipleship as a relationship of growth. Highlight shared learning, and then create entry points for non-believers. See, mentorship can be a bridge to discipleship. For example, mentoring someone in a life skill like managing finances. We have people at our church that do that. That's like their side hustle or their professional thing. We have folks that develop leaders, again, side hustle professionally. Sometimes the entryway in for a non-believer is that, and then they invite that person who they're mentoring in a life skill like managing finances or developing leaders or building healthy relationships. Those things can naturally open doors to spiritual conversations and eventually lead to sharing the gospel. Because if you're a follower of the way and the opportunity presents itself, you want to share this good news that you have. Peter wrote, always be prepared to share the good news. And then empower your team to mentor with a kingdom focus. So train your church leaders and volunteers to see mentorship as a form of kind of pre-discipleship. Encourage them to intentionally guide others, not just in practical matters, but also in exploring faith and spiritual truths. And keep in mind as you're building these relationships, because this happened the other day, everybody's not always going to be having a good day. I am so not a fan of toxic positivity. That's happening right now. There's fires going on in California right now, and folks are like, yeah, but you have your life. Yeah, but dude, they lost everything. They lost this. I'm sitting here in my office right now, just looking around the room going, yeah, I might not care that much about the whiteboard. Yeah, the whiteboard could be replaced, but I'd be crushed because there's notes on the whiteboard that I haven't taken a picture of yet or written down someplace else. And I would be, in a very nerdy kind of way, very crushed over that. Or just the loss of clothes. Over the holiday break, my college age daughter was going through her clothes, and she took all her show shirts from, and sometimes she listens to this, so hey there. Uh, she took all her show shirts from high school, from shows that she worked on in high school, and she's like, I'm just going to throw these out. And I was like, no, you're not. Now, granted, I'm a pack rat and a bit of a hoarder, but I had her save those. I was like, maybe we'll make a quilt one day. I don't know, but just put them in my closet. Like, I would be crushed losing that stuff. And yeah, the things in your home have personal meaning, and yes, your life is more important, but stop it with the toxic positivity. And that's important to train your team with also when it comes to empowering them to mentor with a kingdom focus. Every day is not going to be a good day for everyone. And so you have to learn to recognize and use that emotional intelligence to realize that sometimes somebody's not going to be having a good day. And that happened with a group, one of our groups recently, where someone came to the group meeting and they weren't in a good mood. And the other folks in the group were like, oh, well, we don't know what to do with that. Empower your team leaders to be intentional about grace. Encourage them to intentionally guide others, not just in practical matters, but also in exploring faith and spiritual truths. And one of those truths includes grace. So, how can you empower your team to mentor and lead as disciple makers? It starts with equipping them to be intentional in their relationships, modeling Christ-like behavior, creating opportunities for others to grow both personally and spiritually. Remember, mentorship can be the doorway to discipleship. It's a bridge that connects everyday life to the transformative power of the gospel. And so this intentionality, what are some ways that what does that look like? Like, I don't want to just leave you there with that. I could. I mean, I've been talking for over 20 minutes. I could leave you right there, but I don't. I want to talk a little bit about what does that intentionality look like. It's not just assigning the title of mentor or disciple maker. It's embracing the actions that build trust and cultivate those meaningful relationships. Because you can give grace to a stranger, but it's hard, and that's usually easy. It's easy to be kind to strangers. It's harder to be kind to people we know. And then we want to try to figure out what's going on in their world and then make excuses for them or even against them to say, you could do better. Again, that toxic positivity. You got to be mindful of that. So what are the actions that build trust and cultivate meaningful relationships? Well, mentoring begins with the right mindset. Have you ever been asked by someone, will you be my mentor? While well-intentioned, that request can feel like an overwhelming obligation, especially to someone with a busy schedule. Happens in church settings all the time with discipleship. Someone will say, well, can you disciple me? Or they all want the pastor to disciple them. The pastor or the folks that are on the preaching team, they're preaching from the platform. They don't necessarily have the bandwidth, but they also may not have the relational, what is the word? The relational depth with you, the relational, I can't think of it. It'll come to me. I can't think of it. But they don't know you. So asking someone to be your mentor, sometimes it's hard, and it's well-intentioned, but for the person who's sitting there going, I don't know how I'm going to fit that in, here's what you do instead. Instead of focusing on the label, Encourage your team to focus on actions. Share wisdom from their experiences. So ask this, instead of saying, will you be my mentor? Ask, or be my disciple maker, or disciple me. Ask specifically about sharing wisdom from their experiences. Ask thought-provoking questions. Ask about walking alongside others in their faith journey. What was their experience like with that? One of my favorite quotes from Marcel Proust, which encapsulates this mindset, is, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." Mentoring and disciple making aren't about offering a roadmap to follow. They're about helping others see their journey through new eyes. Now, how can you do that? You might say, in a very practical way, when it comes to sharing wisdom or asking questions, hey, I know you don't know me, but is it okay if I text you, or if I buy you a cup of coffee, or if we go to lunch after church? That kind of thing. The second thing is, after beginning with the right mindset, is the power of questions in disciple making. There's a significant difference between sharing knowledge and asking questions. Knowledge points to the past, history, things that have already happened. While this is valuable, it's static. Hey, how did you handle this situation? How did you find Jesus? What was your experience like as a young adult in the 1990s? What was your college years like when it came to Jesus? Sometimes it's a history question, but it's something that's already happened. Valuable information, it may provide help for you, but it's static, because stuff that we did in the 90s, pre-social media, some of it doesn't, or the way that we address things or handle things, some of it doesn't translate to now with social media, with texting, with dating apps and all of that, or the internet, or ChatGPT, having access to other ways to ask questions. So questions, on the other hand, are dynamic and they're future oriented. But you have to ask dynamic and future oriented questions that open up possibilities, spark innovation, or encourage growth. So as you train your team to be mentors that are disciple makers, emphasize the importance of asking questions. Questions like, what is God teaching you in this season? How can I support you in taking your next step? Where do you see God calling you to grow or to serve? Questions not only create space for exploration, but also demonstrate humility and a willingness to learn alongside others. And then be mindful of time and capacity. I mean, let's face it, time is precious. And for many of us, it feels like there's never enough of it. Many potential mentors and disciple makers are juggling multiple responsibilities, just like me. Here's a glimpse into my life. I'm a teaching pastor with administrative duties also a founding pastor. So I'm in charge of stuff officially and unofficially. I oversee technology and communications for our church. The VP of my son's school's parent organization. It's a volunteer role that sometimes feels like a full-time job. I'm a mom to 4 kids. One is grown, but still part of our daily lives. One's in middle school with a packed schedule. I've got a high school senior. I've got a college sophomore. Of course, this podcast that I manage and host, I do all my own editing and technical work related to it because I can, and it's a hobby and it's fun and I enjoy it still. So it's not something that I'm ready to hand off or farm out or delegate, but I do all of those things. So Patreon and Substack for now. If you keep sharing these episodes with your friends, maybe I'll blow up and I won't be able to manage it all on my own. But occasionally, I also keep one foot in my career as a corporate trainer and project manager because, well, honestly, it just pays better than everything else that I'm doing. So With so much on our plates, what do we have to do? Being mindful of time and capacity. I love the way that Pete Scazzaro teaches it in Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. He talks about setting limits, understanding your limits, realizing that we have limits. We like to say things in a grandiose way, like, I can do all these things. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Completely takes that out of context. Paul was sitting in prison at the time. He had the greatest boundary of all. It was like, yeah, I can do all this stuff because, I can write these letters, but I'm kind of locked up right now. So he wasn't saying go and do all the things and be all the things in a and blow up your life or burn out, set yourself up for burnout. No. What we learn in the New Testament is, and through Jesus especially, set boundaries. Operate from a place of rest. That's why the Sabbath rhythm is so important. Honor those rhythms of the Sabbath. Prioritize quality over quantity. A single meaningful conversation can make a big impact. Remember that. A single meaningful conversation can have a great impact. You have no idea the moment that you take at a Starbucks to talk to somebody in line or sitting outside at the table next to you, how that impacts them. That parent that you are volunteering with at your child's school, that maybe they don't have a church home and maybe they might not culturally be a fit at your church. You don't know, you still invite them, but they may, or it may not be something that, maybe they go to a church, but they don't feel like they're able to talk about what's going on in their life to the folks at their home church because they want to present themselves as having it all together. So they're talking to you. All of those things, the power of a conversation. Prioritize quality over quantity. Being mindful of time and capacity, setting boundaries, and then be intentional in how we invest our time and energy. I've actually gotten a little bit better at that. One of the things, and because I've gotten better at that, I'll say this, because I have gotten better at setting boundaries, prioritizing quality over quantity, and intentionality in how I invest my time and my energy, I actually have started exercising since the beginning of the year. I have not consistently done anything remotely akin to consistent exercising or stretching or whatever in decades. But I have been doing that since the beginning of the year, partly because as a Christmas gift, Santa brought me a walking pad. It's a treadmill with no guardrails, so pray for me that I don't hurt myself. But taking the time in the evening or throughout the day, 10 minutes here, 30 minutes there, and going for a walk and not necessarily having to leave the house because of, deal with the weather outside, which right now in the A, we got snow on the ground, y'all, which is crazy. It's still on the ground. It snowed Friday. There's still snow out there. That's how cold it is and continues to be. But I digress. So mentoring begins with the right mindset, sharing wisdom from our life experiences, making it, being intentional about the power of questions, asking questions like, what is God teaching you in this season? Being mindful of my time and capacity as a human. Like, I can't do everything myself. And so there's some things that I have to delegate. It's part of leadership, but also leading myself well. Setting boundaries, intentionality of how I invest my time and my energy. And number 4, building a diverse mentoring team. An effective mentoring culture in your ministry, in your nonprofit, in your neighborhood, whatever it is that you're doing, or in your circle of friends. Building an effective mentoring culture is rooted in having a variety of relationships. Having somebody more senior who can offer wisdom and perspective from their experience. I found this particularly helpful when I belonged to a homeschool group when we were still homeschooling the kids. Finding a mom whose kids were a little bit older than mine, who's already walked that path or that grade level or that age level or that level of maturity or that, whatever. It just to say, you've already done this. Can I ask you a question? Building a diverse mentoring team not only includes someone senior, it also includes someone who's a peer, a friendtor, a peer mentor, a trusted equal who provides encouragement and accountability, someone junior, a reverse mentor, someone newer to the journey who brings fresh perspectives and energy. This is the thing that I love about talking to the Gen Z adults at our church, because they are looking at things with a fresh set of eyes that those of us, honestly, who are a lot older and jaded at this point may not see or notice. And so someone senior, a peer, someone junior, that's the diversity of your mentoring team. And encourage your team to seek and nurture these relationships. The goal isn't hierarchy, but mutual growth and learning. I want to stress that. The goal, I talk about hierarchy all the time when it comes to like marriage relationships, but even in the early church, it wasn't about hierarchy. There were leaders, yes, but everybody is equal in the eyes of God. And so you want to be, some hierarchy is, I guess, necessary from a structural standpoint, organizationally, but also keep in mind that there's a way to navigate hierarchy without it being oppressive, like going all the way there. And I get that, throwing the word oppressive out there may sound a little extreme, but that's one of the reasons people don't go to church. If I see another article about how the percentage of women who are in churches has dropped to and hovering at like 40% versus, hey, it's been great, we've got lots of guys in church now. That statistic should frighten people, because women have been the backbone of churches for centuries, okay? And women, by and large, are saying they've had enough of the oppressive environment, whether it's overt or not, or if it's, subversive. It's that feeling like I'm doing all the things, but I'm not making any progress. Not a good feeling. No longer acceptable in our culture, and not acceptable in scripture either, but there's that. And so women are just not showing up for churches anymore. They're not there for that. So you do have to recognize in this environment that we are building in a diverse mentoring team, someone who's senior, someone who's a peer, someone who's junior, and the cautionary tale is hierarchy, ultimately. Okay, the next thing that's important when it comes to thinking about if creating a team or equipping your team to become effective mentors and disciple makers is this: focus on the questions, model mentorship, provide resources. Aha! One of the new things that we're trying this year with launching the small groups at our church is we're just going to provide the resources and say, hey, here are the resources. We just need somebody to lead. One of the things that I think, or the feedback that I've received in recent times has been, well, I was thinking about leading or facilitating, but I don't know where to begin. I don't know what to lead on. I don't have an idea and I don't have time to look. So I've done looking. And so I'll make sure I provide resources. Create opportunities, celebrate wins. So focus on the questions. We've talked about that a lot today. Teach them how to ask open-ended, future-focused questions that spark dialogue. Open-ended, future-focused questions that spark dialogue. Not how did you do this in the past, but what are you doing now? How is God speaking to you today? How does that align with scripture? How does that align with the Sermon on the Mount? How can we live life like Jesus has told us to live life, loving God, loving our neighbor, loving one another? And then model that. Model mentorship. Share your own experiences of being mentored and what it was like mentoring others. If you are training a team, of disciple makers talk about what it was like to be discipled, what it's like to continue to be discipled. How are you being discipled? We all follow someone. What are we doing? How is that? What does that look like for us? And then provide resources. Equip your team with books or podcasts or articles that align with your ministry's discipleship goals. I think it's important for us to share not just from our own lives, but also the lives of others, the other resources. When I tell you, I took a whole semester course on discipleship in seminary and then went on to work on my doctorate with a focus on discipleship. When I tell you there's a lot of books on discipleship out there, there's a lot of books on discipleship out there. And you know what I've noticed? They all kind of say the same thing. Focus on the questions, model mentorship, provide resources, create opportunities, celebrate the wins. What are the opportunities? Facilitate spaces for relationships to develop naturally, like your small groups or community groups or ministry teams. One of the things that our church sometimes because we're a relatively small church, in the ebbs and flows of people's lives, there have been seasons where the small group semester crashed and burned. It's like people didn't show up. They were too busy. Too much was going on in their lives. The cat died, all of that. And that made it a challenge to navigate having small groups. But you know what I noticed? Small groups happened organically. So I'd pay attention, and I'd instruct our other leaders in the church in general to pay attention. Who's hanging out after church? Who's talking in the parking lot? I would literally go and insert myself in conversations in the parking lot after church on a Sunday, and then suggest that people go to lunch. Hey, as much as fun as it is to stand here in the parking lot in the sun and 90-degree Georgia heat, why not? There's some restaurants down the street. Maybe you're not familiar with the place down the street that you can get Chinese food or Mexican food. And point them in that direction so they can carry on their conversation, and then say, hey, have you listened to this podcast? Have you checked out this book? Or, the Bible Project has some great videos online. Help people navigate a holistic approach to creating their own community and small groups within your church. If you have to. If you're not able to get folks, but to create the opportunities, look for them, and help encourage them proactively. And then the other way is serving teams. Sometimes small groups, they could be thriving and people are meeting intentionally for their small groups, but other people need to be doing something. So we focus on outreach teams or serve teams, like making the coffee together. You would be surprised how much fun it is in the church kitchen on Sunday mornings with the folks who are on the hospitality team and greeting team, because they are down there cutting up fruit and preparing platters of pastries, and some of them get really creative with it. And it's a whole thing. It's a whole vibe, but they're down there and they're talking to each other and they're sharing their life for the week. And you know what? That's spiritual formation. It is discipleship. It is mentoring, because the older people are sharing their lives with the younger people. The younger people are asking questions about their lives now. Like one of the things I just mentioned that I've been exercising because I've been managing my time better. I'm looking at what my life will be like 20 years from now. Why? Because I know people who are 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, 40 years older than me, and some of them are in really great shape. And I was on track, or up until a couple of weeks ago, on track to not be. So it's important to know people. And then after, creating those opportunities, diversity of your team, celebrate the wins, highlight the impact of their mentoring efforts, highlight the impact that these efforts have on individuals and the community. Talk about the wins in the leadership meetings. Talk about the wins in real time, like walk in there as a church leader when they're making the coffee and say, hey, I love how you guys do this. This here is life-giving. I love talk to the parking team. I love how you guys are doing this. Let me tell you a win. Someone came in and they said, I was feeling really down until I pulled up on the church campus, and somebody on the parking team, security team, said something to me that just really encouraged me and was just looked genuinely happy to see me, even though I was 25 minutes late for church. And y'all, our service is only a little bit over an hour most Sundays. So an hour and a half. The planning center service plan says 70 minutes. It's never really 70 minutes. It's closer to 90. But that said, being 30 minutes late for something that's only 90 minutes long, someone saying, hey, I'm still happy you showed up. That's a big deal. So yes, celebrate the wins. Celebrate the wins from the platform. And I make sure that my husband, when he's up there on the platform, on the stage, that he is sharing wins. If I'm up there doing the welcome, or if it's my turn to teach or something, I'm up there, I'm like, I will work in some of these things into whatever message I'm giving. Because it's important to let people know, hey, this is what's working. And we're excited about it. At its core, mentoring and disciple making are about relationships. Everything I've highlighted today is about relationship building, being relational, being seen, being known. It's not about having all the answers or a perfect plan. It's about showing up, asking good questions, and helping others see their faith journey with new eyes. See themselves in the Bible, see themselves in the story. As you train your team this year, remind them that the goal isn't perfection, but faithfulness. As you train yourself, maybe you're listening to this podcast as a faithful listener of No More Silos and Patreon and Substack supporter. Yay, thank you so much for your support. And you're doing this just on your own, and you're like, how can I do better? How can I be there? How can I show up for someone in 2025? Remember, the goal isn't about perfection. The goal is faithfulness. It's consistency. Mentors and disciple makers don't have to do it all. They just need to do what they can, where they are, with what they have. So here's my question for you to kind of reflect upon and think about as I wrap up what has turned into a much longer episode than I had anticipated. Who can you pour into this year? And who can you invite to pour into you? Let's commit to making this year of intentional relationships that reflect the love, grace, and the wisdom of Jesus Christ. So if you're looking for more resources to equip your team or to grow your own mentoring skills, check out my podcast episodes here on No More Silos. There are plenty of episodes where I talk about relational intelligence, discipleship, spiritual formation, how we got our Bible. Join my Patreon community at No More Silos, or subscribe to my Substack. It's new. I only have 2 posts up, but by the time you hear this, maybe I'll have some more, because there I'm putting together exclusive content, revisiting some of the older episodes, and I am able to put on Substack sometimes, just in a written form, some of the things that we talk about here in a way so that you don't have to take notes. So practical steps for you and your team: focus on the questions, model mentorship, provide resources, create opportunities, celebrate wins. Remember, mentoring and discipleship are kind of the same. It just depends upon what your motivation is. And that's what we've been talking about today. So thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me here on No More Silos. Please like or share this podcast in your podcast app. Share it with others. Leave a comment. Comments actually help folks find it when they're searching for things, cultural Christianity or offbeat Bible studies, and let people know that I'm here. Have a great rest of your day, and see you next time.